As you just heard Laura read, we are in John chapter 8, beginning in verse 12 today, and we're going to hear this morning Jesus' second I am statement in the Gospel of John. And if you remember when we kicked off this series about 7 months ago, Tim gave us a little sneak peek into what some of the things that John did to help us see that Jesus was precisely who he claimed to be. This first half of John's Gospel, the first 11 chapters, is known as the Book of Signs. We've talked at great length about his signs, that they're not mere miracles, but they're miracles that are filled with meaning. They signify something. They point beyond themselves to a truth that Jesus wants you to know about himself. There are 7 of them. 7 in the Bible is the number of fullness, completion. There are also 7 I am statements, and John does this on purpose. Of course, the I am in the I am statements is intentional also, because when Jesus says it, in and of itself, that is a claim to be the same one who said to Moses from the burning bush, I am. It is a claim to divinity. But the fact that there are 7 of those is a way for John to tell us he is the fullness of God in human form. There's nothing diminished. He is not less than. He is of the same substance as the Father. He and the Father are one. He is God. But the neat thing about the I am statements is not only that Jesus is claiming to be God, but he is telling you, therefore, what God is like. But there's something else that's great about these I am statements. That in telling us what God is like, he is communicating to us what God gives to those who trust him. We've already seen one of his I am statements. Do you remember what it was? I am the bread of life. We spent, several months on that chapter, in chapter 6. He said, I am the bread of life. And when he said that, of course, it was a claim to be God. It was also a claim about what God is like. When he says, I'm the bread of life, what he's saying is what bread is to your body, I am to your soul. He might as well have been saying, I am the satisfier. That is who I am. But I want you to notice this. And I skipped this slide. You don't have to go back to it. The I am statements are not only revealing to us something that is true about God, they are also exposing something that is true about you and me. He says, I am the satisfier. What does that statement expose about you? When he says, I am the bread of life, he is saying there is no other food. You know that hunger inside you that food won't touch, and neither will success, achievement, wealth, romance, human friendship? Nothing touches it. It's because I am the only thing that can satisfy that spiritual hunger that is deep inside of you. So therefore, this statement, I am the bread of life, it is at the same time saying, I am the satisfier and you are starving. However, Jesus is not coming and telling people, look how great I am and look how bad you are. There's more to it than that. Because you see, Jesus is putting himself forward as the solution to what is broken in you. He is saying, what is so great about me is what you most deeply need. And therefore, all of his I am statements, they also have either explicit or kind of baked in, inherently implied. There's an invitation there. And so he says, come. I'm the satisfier. You're starving. Come. And so all of Jesus' self-revelation, it is also at the same time a confrontation and an invitation. It's a confrontation because it is exposing something in us that we really would rather not think about. And it's an invitation because he's saying, I am the one who can fix that thing in you that is broken and that you would rather not pay attention to. I'm the one. I'm the one. I'm the only one that can fix it. So this week, we're going to look at his second I am statement in John 8, beginning in verse 12, where he says, I am the light of the world. It's a pretty audacious claim. And here is what I want us to see. First of all, I want to understand the claim that he makes. Secondly, I want us to understand the crisis that that claim creates. And then third, I want you to hear the call that he extends. And you can see that same pattern. This is revelation, confrontation, invitation. Okay? So let's look, beginning in verse 12 of chapter 8. Listen to this claim. Again, Jesus spoke to them saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. That very first phrase in verse 12 says, again, Jesus spoke to them. If we're going to understand the depth of what Jesus is claiming here, we have to understand when he said it, where he said it, and to whom he said it. You're going to have to go back with me a few weeks ago when we were looking at John chapter 7, when Jesus said, if anyone thirsts, come to me and drink. And if you recall, Jesus said that right in the middle of what was known as, in the Jewish tradition, the Feast of Tabernacles, the Feast of Booths. And there were all kinds of traditions around this particular feast. The Jewish people, they would literally move into tents for about a week, and they would have these daily rituals. They had this water ritual that would both look back to God's faithfulness in providing for them in the wilderness. Water came forth from the rock when they were thirsty. They looked to him in the present to provide the rains so that they might, their crops might grow, they could eat and be sustained. But they also looked forward to the living water that would come in the Messianic age. And this ritual, I mean, when Jesus speaks, you know, they're powerful words when he says, come to me and drink, but when you understand when he said it, it just frames it all. Jesus says these words at the same time frame. Commentators believe this was either the same day, but later that night, or it was the next evening. But it was right around the same time, which is why it says, again, Jesus spoke to them, saying. And here's what would happen at that feast. We know that later in this passage, it says, Jesus said this in the court of women, which was the most public place in the temple. It was where people would come and give their offerings. It was also the place where during the Feast of Booths, they would carry out this every evening light tradition. And here's what the priests would do. They would erect these gigantic lampstands. They were huge and made of gold. They had 4 bowls, and so there were 16 bowls in all. And the priests would climb ladders. They would fill these bowls with oil. They would take worn-out priestly garments. They would turn them into wicks, and they would burn these things. And there was so much light emanating on this night, rejoicing would break forth, worship, dancing, singing. And it was said that there was not one courtyard in all of Jerusalem that was not illuminated by the light that was coming from the temple. And that is just in and of itself a picture of what the temple was supposed to be, a light to the nations. But it was saying a whole lot more than that. What do you think this tradition of the lights, when they are remembering God's faithfulness in the wilderness, what was that pointing to? It was pointing to the very presence of God that manifested, if you see in Exodus 13, it says, and the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them along the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, that they might travel by day and by night. God's presence shows up. And often in the Old Testament, but all over Exodus, when his presence is manifest, it is most frequently accompanied by light, fire. Of course, there was the cloud, which would give them shade and comfort by day. But it was said in Exodus 13 that Israel in the wilderness, they had the manifest presence of God, and he did not leave. One of my favorite stories, which you heard read this morning, was from Exodus 33. When Moses, who was consistently experiencing this presence of God, he would even go into the tent of meeting. The cloud would sit outside the tent, and it said that God would speak to Moses like a friend. Well, one time Moses goes up on to the mountain to receive the 10 Commandments for a second time. He broke them when he was angry, another story. But he goes up there for the second time, and he's begging God that his presence would not depart from the people. And Moses effectively says, God, if your presence departs from us, if you will not go with us into the promised land, we're not going. Moses is saying, we would rather die here in the wilderness than go somewhere without you. And God says to Moses, my presence will go with you. And Moses, in perhaps the most audacious claim in all of the Bible, he says to God, show me your glory. And God, as you heard, he says, Moses, I cannot do that. No man can see my face and live, but I will let my goodness go before you, and I will declare my name. I will put you in the cleft of a rock, I will cover your eyes, and when I pass by, I will take away my hand, and you will see the back side. He mooned Moses. It was the afterglow. And here's the deal. Moses just caught like a glimpse of the glory of God. And it says he bowed down and worshiped. But do you know when Moses came down off of that mountain, do you know what happened? He was glowing. He didn't know it. I was reflecting on this week, and I just had this thought. God says, Moses, you cannot see my face. But just in catching a glimpse of his glory, when he came down on that mountain, everybody could see God on his face. God's presence changed him. God's presence would manifest in the tabernacle. It said the cloud would come over the tabernacle and it filled the tabernacle such that Moses couldn't go in there or he would die, he would be consumed. In 1 Kings 8, the glory of the Lord fills the temple when Solomon has the temple built. But then in Ezekiel, it's tragic. In verse 8, after years of persistent disobedience, rebellion, idolatry, the prophet Ezekiel tells us of a time when the glory of God would depart. And it did. And it's heartbreaking. You see this God leaving the temple out of the east gate. And in chapter 10, it says, it's not coming back, but in chapter 11, it says, there will be a day when the glory returns. Now, back to the feast. Tradition has it that on this particular night, they would not light the candles. And here's why I think that is. I think they were acknowledging the glory has departed from the temple. We were meant to be a light to the nations, but the glory, because of our disobedience, has departed. But there were messianic promises. If you'll see here in Isaiah, it says, the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. This is pointing to the messianic age. And on this night, when the lights, which had previously been lit for 7 straight nights, on this night, tradition suggests, this is not in the Bible, but tradition suggests they did not light the candles on this night. And that is the night that Jesus steps into the court of women and says, I am the light of the world. When he says, I am the light of the world, what he's saying is, I am the light that this light has always pointed to. I am the very presence and glory of God, which is no longer a pillar. It is a person. His name is Jesus. In John 1:14, he would tell us, and the word became flesh and dwelt among us. That word dwelt is tabernacle. This is so on purpose in John's gospel. He says, and we have seen his glory as of the only Son from the Father. And then get this, full of grace and truth. When God made his goodness pass before Moses and declared his name, and when you interpret those words from Hebrew into Greek, it is grace and truth. Here in the courtyard, where the glory has departed, Jesus is saying the glory has returned. Here's the tragedy. They couldn't see it. See, what Moses wanted but couldn't see, they saw but did not want. Now, I want to talk about the crisis that this creates. When Jesus tells them that he's the light of the world, it is a claim about himself, but it also is producing a confrontation in the hearts of the people that hear it. Listen again to what he says in verse 12. I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness. When Jesus says, whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, what is the implication? You are walking in darkness if you are not following me. You're blind. Your hearts are darkened. You cannot see. Or maybe it's better to say, you will not see. In almost this entire section that I had been assigned to teach, it is this confrontation. It's just over and over again. They either will not see or they cannot see. And so I just want to give you a couple different snapshots. But let's look in verse 13 to their immediate response where Jesus essentially says, I am the answer for everything that is broken in you. And they say, in verse 13, so the Pharisees said to him, you are bearing witness about yourself. Your testimony is not true. Jesus is giving them the best news. They're staring into the face of God. And they try to catch him on a technicality. See, this is juror number 3, if you were here a couple of weeks ago. This is not an intellectual struggle. This is a struggle of the will. It's an emotional struggle. They had already decided that they would not believe, and therefore they were looking for support for what they had already predetermined was going to be their position. They would not believe. But then, as we move forward, in verse 27, it says this, they did not understand that he had been speaking to them about the Father. Jesus enters into this conversation. He labors so patiently with them to help them see who he is. And then in verse 27, it says, but they did not understand he was talking about the Father. They didn't know he was talking about God. Now, I want to go back, and I pulled out a few things that he said in this passage before verse 27 to help you understand how ridiculous verse 27 is. So let's look at this next slide. He says, I am the light of the world. Okay, what do you think he's talking about? Never mind the imagery of the Feast of Tabernacles. How about if you just take the sun, the light of the world, the thing that gives all knowledge? If there is no sun, we can't see anything, and therefore we can't know anything. It is the thing that gives life to all, and warmth, and joy, and happiness. Jesus says, I'm that. And they did not know he was talking about God. He said, I am from above. I am not of this world. The Father who sent me bears witness about me. If I'm from above, where do you think my Father is from? He said, he who sent me is true, and I declare to the world what I've heard from him. And now let's look again at verse 27. They did not understand that he had been speaking to them about God. Have you ever just been listening to something and you just couldn't grasp it? See, they wouldn't understand and they couldn't understand. Early in my marriage, Melissa and I went away for a romantic weekend to Stanton. I'd heard about this really cool Shakespeare theater. You see where this is going? It was beautiful. I mean, we walked in, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so fun, romantic. And we go in there, and then Othello starts. And they were speaking English, but I was looking around like, does anyone here understand anything that's happening? Maybe you guys aren't laughing because you do understand Shakespeare. Maybe I'm the only one in here that's not smart enough to grasp it. I was honestly looking around like, what is going on? Everybody's just kind of sitting there. Now, maybe they're all pretending to be smarter than they were, or maybe I really am just that dumb. And so I look over at Melissa, and I was going to ask her if she was tracking, and she was asleep. I'm not kidding. This is she was sleeping because she couldn't, and I couldn't understand. That is what is going on here. Now, I want to give you a little snapshot into why I think this is. John 3, in verse, I believe it's 19, yeah. Listen to what John says about why we struggle to believe. And this is the judgment. The light has come into the world, and the people loved the darkness rather than the light because their works were evil. For everyone who does wicked things hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his works should be exposed. Whether you're willing to deal with this honestly or not, here's the truth. We do not disbelieve because there's so much evidence stacked up against God. We disbelieve because we do not want to consider what that belief would expose in me. We want to remain in the dark. We hate the light. We love the dark. And there is a consequence, grave consequence to this. Quickly, in verse 21, it says, I'm going away. You'll seek me, and you will die in your sin. Where I am going, you cannot come. It says, he said this to them again, because he said this in chapter 7, either the morning before or the day, or that morning or the day before. In verse 22 and 3, he expands on this even further. He said, you're from below. I'm just going to read the highlighted parts. You are of this world. I told you, you would die in your sin. He is telling them, listen, I'm not just here to make you feel bad. I want you to understand the stakes. You belong to the kingdom of darkness, and if you remain there, you will die in your sin. And this is an eternal, forever death. The stakes could not be higher. Now, here's what they do not understand is that he was desperately trying to rescue them. Maybe you have heard a friend of mine speak here at this church before, Mike Ashburn. He's a good buddy of Quig, well-known Young Life staff person. And he tells this incredible story about his sweet little girl who had somehow climbed the ladder he had out, he was cleaning gutters or something, and his daughter climbed up on the roof. And she was young. She didn't even know that it was dangerous up there. And he was so scared that she would fall. And he was afraid that if he shouted, that it would startle her and she would fall off the roof. And if those of you that have heard the story, you know what he did. He came to where she was and he smiled and he held out his arms, showing no fear. He was holding out his arms, and in seeing her dad, she jumped and she was fine. Now, here's why I tell that story. When Jesus says these painful things, can I tell you the spirit in which he wants us to hear it and receive it? You're dying. You need desperately to be rescued. And therefore, let's go to the third point. This is the call that he extends. Let's look again. By the way, all of these are in John 8:12. The whole thing is in John 8:12. Look again. This is the call. It says again, he spoke to them saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. I want to answer two questions this morning. Number one, what does Jesus give? And number two, how does he give it? Let's look again at the verse. When it says, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Would you be willing to consider that light of the world and light of life are synonyms? They are. And therefore, listen again to what Jesus is actually saying here. He's saying, if you follow me, whoever follows me has me. Not something from me. You have me. That means that who I am is what you will have. Said another way, all that I am is all for you. This is why the I am statements are so powerful, because they're not just telling us that he's God. They're not just telling us what God is like. They're telling us that all of that is for me if I would but put my trust in him. So, what is it that he gives? He is giving us everything that what he was giving to Israel in the wilderness was pointing to. Protection, comfort, joy. You know, the fact that Moses was asking to see his glory is evidence that the closer Moses got to him, the more he wanted of him. And this is true of you and me, by the way. The more we get to know Christ, the more we don't just want stuff from him, we want him. And Jesus is telling us here, that's what we get. and everything that comes along with it. We get him. You want to read through this passage and see who Christ is, who always pleases the Father, who hears from him, who learns from him. This is what happens to you when you get him inside you. Here's the second question. How does he give it? Look at verse 28. It's powerful. It says, so Jesus said to them, when you have lifted up the Son of Man, then you will know that I am he. Here's what Jesus is telling them. In order for you to receive, in order for Jesus to give his life to you, he must first give his life for you. Jesus has to come and die in order for you to receive his life. But at the risk of offending you, I'm just teasing, I mean to offend you because Jesus means to offend us. I want you to read this verse again, verse 28. It says, so Jesus said to them, when you have lifted up the Son of Man. We have to come to a place, friends, where we recognize that I am the one that lifted up the Son of Man. It is my sin that put him on that cross. In fact, I have a slide that I can't remember what I wrote. I want to put it up there so I can, oh yeah, I said that. What's next? Oh yeah, before you can see him for all that he is, you must first accept all that he says you are. We have to let him step on our toes. As I've said before he can heal you, he has to hurt you. Before he can win you, he has to wound you. I want to put it to you this way. I want to give you an analogy that has been helpful for me as I've reflected and studied this passage over the last couple of weeks. The doorway to experiencing Jesus for all that he is a mirror. And the reason that we resist walking through it is because we have to look honestly at ourselves before we do. I'm reading a book right now called The Awe of God. And he said, every single one of us has three images. We have, first of all, a perceived image. That's how we see ourselves. Then we have a projected image. That's what you see when you look at me. And I'll tell you something, that's a little bit less true than the first one. But then there's a third one, and he calls that the actual image. And we don't want to look at that. We fight pretty hard to not see that. And here is the problem with it. Until you look in the mirror, until you see yourself as the one who lifted up the Son of Man, until you understand that it is your sin, you look in the mirror, just fully exposed in the light for all that you are. Until you do, you will not open that door. But the moment that you do, you will sprint through. Because you will be realizing in that moment, all that he is all for me. And it's all that I need. See, when Jesus said to these guys, you cannot come where I am going, that was not the whole story. It is the stakes, but it's not the whole story. Jesus, knowing that we could not come where he is going, came down from above. He came down below where we are. Even more, he came down to become what we are. 2 Corinthians 5:21. He who knew no sin became sin. He became your sin. That in dying, we might become the righteousness of God. Who is the righteousness of God? Jesus Christ. What is Paul saying here? Let me stitch it together. He came down from where he was to where we are to become what we are, in order that in dying we might become what he is, so that we can go where he is going. Do you know him? Have you looked in the mirror? I don't know where you're at this morning, but this is a message for Christians and non-Christians alike. We resist looking in the mirror, but I'm telling you, if you would be willing to look honestly at yourself and see that I am the one that lifted him up, you know what happens? He comes and he fills you up. It will change your life forever. Let's pray. Father, thank you. We need you. We are desperate for you. We will die without you. In Christ's name, amen.